I'd also like to thank Larry for that introduction and also acknowledge the Menang Noongar people, show my respects to elders past and present, and my determination to help those coming. It's been a rough couple of 100 years. It was one of the first dot paintings I ever looked at really hard, and little footprints and things everywhere, and I couldn't work it out, and I found it's quite useful to look at the title. So that's me. That's the title of the talk, and I thought I'd deal with one thing straight up, that we're here 4 or 5 hours drive south of the most isolated capital in the world, in this little back pocket of Australia. And if anyone's actually thinking, yeah, you know, we can't really mix it with UN and all that big stuff, over lunchtime, look out the window. You go back to the late 80s, 90s, that waterway out there was close to a putrid mess. Seagrass was collapsing. You know, you couldn't eat shellfish. They had the signs up. And in the next decade, 15 years, an incredible coalition of industries, some of which were going out anyway, but some went a bit faster, some cleaned up their act. The government agencies that I had a little bit to do with at the time were a wonderful cohesive force. You had the land care groups, and you had globally known pioneers like Jeff Bastian out there playing around with seagrass, and it's cleaned up now. So it is a classic example of large-scale ecosystem restoration, as is Oyster Harbour, which Bruce is going to touch on a bit later today. Yeah, beauty. So we are going to have a UN decade of ecosystem restoration. It's been announced now for about 5 months. It's come from a whole range of sources. It's possibly for a battered landscape like southwestern Australia, it's our big opportunity to strut our stuff. A couple of nice statements there from various important people. Important to note that it's a bit of a joint thing between the UN Environment Programme and the Food and Agricultural Organisation. It comes at a time when there is big stuff happening all around the world. And there's just a few examples of transformative landscape scale works happening. We've had a little role in a couple. That lovely mob in Northland in New Zealand, we worked with the Tyndall Foundation for about 4 years to help design that and mentor it up, and they're going like steam. Learned from all our mistakes, and there was a lot to learn from, and great colleagues still. We swapped notes, and the picture up there of the crew in Africa, I'll be coming back to that, but if anyone knew Miki Bourne when she was working here with the Department of Water, now in Nairobi, now part of International Land Care and part of a thing called the Global Evergreening Alliance. I'll come back to. I just wanted to quickly touch on the word restoration, because you get all these straw men put up about, straw persons put up about it. It's not about going back to before Captain Cook. You know, you can never preserve an ecosystem. They change every day. They're dynamic. But there is processes. There's some nice quotes of reversing the degradation of systems. Tim's been talking about a restorative process that's in that recognised continuum. And the other point I want to make from our national standards for restoration, it's a social process as much as anything else. It's a science symposium, so I figured a complex graph that I can't understand would... I thought I might get the prize, but you geologists, oh, God, they were good. But again, I just want to stress, and look, there's a classic view of recovery over time. That's what your waterways have done in our time. But again, it's another way of stressing that it's not just about a pristine, conserved, preserved natural environment. It's about the goods and services that we live off. It's about what's his phrase? Yeah, it is ecosystem goods and services. Right, oh yeah, I was meant to talk about Gondwana. Well, I'm not going to talk much about it, because if you don't know about it, then where you been? But, you know, we're an 18-year-old program that's led out of Albany, involving people over a lot of that 1,000-kilometre pathway that we drew on actually drew it in the gravel at the back of the Pingrup Roadhouse initially. This is the version 2. But there's a view of many of us, and there's a bit of science in it, that this is the big opportunity to keep the functional strength of the southwest ecosystems going. The stuff that's 250 million years or thereabouts since the last wipe clean of glaciation. Some of the oldest continuous evolution on Earth. And before we go any further, I just want to note one of the scientists we've had the privilege of working with. This is a fellow called Michael Sulay, a bit recognised as the father of conservation biology. He actually was audacious enough to say science actually has to serve urgent needs of the planet. Michael passed away about a month ago, and he was kicking around. He first came to WA in '88. We met him down at Bustleton at the first ever Corridors conference and carried some of that conversation with us ever since. And I'll give you one quote to give you a measure of his personality. Whatever the environmental question is in Australia, the answer is dingo. He was known to be a little bit controversial. A quick skim on a couple of things happening. There is now a place called the Great Western Woodlands. It's only 12 years since that name was known. Before then it was that bush the other side of the fence. Now recognised as the largest temperate woodland on Earth. What is it, 3.5 or 4 Tasmanias in size? And a fair whack of it is now under the management of the Nudgee Conservation Aboriginal Corporation, who got exclusive native title to 4.5 million hectares. Ian Herford's in the audience somewhere. I'll leave it to Ian to talk over lunch about government's role and their ongoing strategy. He does it well, I'm told, particularly behind closed doors. But it is about social transformation. Go to Norseman nowadays, little country town. There's the pub, there's the IGA, there's the courthouse, there's the cop shop, there's the Shire office, there's the ranger base. Just a quote from another notable scientist. Some of you would have seen Sean on the Source on the ABC the other night out at Norseman. I thought those words he used for how the Norseman community had dealt with a severe alcohol problem is probably applicable to a lot of the issues. But there is an issue, and there is a twist to this. I mean, I'm still on local is best, always have been. But local is best, and we need change at scale. So we'll quote a lovely Lucia Query. I'll let you read that while I prattle on about other things. But basically, the trick we're trying to do is it's a design, it's a social process, it's an organic growth thing that we've been using with G-Link. How do you help the little bits all add up to the big bits? And that's the challenge of tackling climate change. It's not all hard science. There is an important role for social sciences in this. It's one of my Bibles from a scientist practitioner, The Science of Open Spaces. He's got great words of wisdom in there in how to do this stuff without trying to control it. There has been a phenomenal growth in our ability to turn those lovely soils that Wal and Tim were talking about, that agriculture has a little bit too much of, back to bush. That's a 110 hectare, I think, bit of restoration on Bill and Jane Thompson's Yarrawea property, carbon neutral, and the Australian government funded it. And the little dot down the bottom, Justin Johnson from Threshold Environmental put it in, building on the agricultural technologies that we have in this area. That's a modified Great Plains cedar. We have tried the big air cedars for this. Nah, not yet. But 25 hectares a day, 80, 100, 120 species in the mix. Very impressive when you... Some people I know have recently sat in the middle of a 900 hectare paddock that has just been planted and thought, oh, it's a bit overwhelming. But I want to make a quick point. When you pull back a bit, the 15,500 hectares of restoration plantings that have happened in the Gondwaling Central Zone, not quite at the scale we actually need if we're going to get function back. But what they are is a really useful, we now know how to do it, we've got the foundation, we can show proof of concept, and we've built a lot of momentum, dispersed energy, focused on doing it. There's not a contradiction there. that we are now in the process of building on. This is a photo from about 4 or 5 years ago, the quite important project that Steve Hopper, Dave Coates, Mark Burns, Ziggy Kraus, DBCA, Botanic Garden, local landholders and contractors, UWA have done. My favourite phrase, the iceberg's melting. I'm not going to run around and promote too much science, but once you've got something happening, they tend to come in, a bit like migratory birds. Sharing the knowledge. Now, some of you would have been next door when we booked it out and premiered our film Breathing Life into Budja. We managed to crack in, and look, there's even a couple of movie stars in the audience. Managed to crack a couple of those screenings before COVID hit. It's with a distributor. It's going to get out there more. We're also building, it's called Hotspot Journeys at the moment. You might have a better phrase for it, I'd love to know. But we're building a trail around the biodiversity hotspot in the Southwest Biodiversity Hotspot that is the Great Southern. And it's going to be a mixture of sites, it's going to be a mixture of podcasts that people can listen to. People are calling it a tourism thing, that's why Bruce Manning funded it. I call it adult education. So many important stories in this district we've got to share, and we can make money out of sharing. And there's going to be a big Don Warnlink display and a Great Western Woodlands display and lots of little movies going in the new museum in Perth by November too. So a bit of activity there. Oh, keep looking this way. I'll mention that, again, to me, understanding the social processes is pivotal. It's not a bloody corporate, God at the boss and all the workers. So we've managed to attract a few historians, one of whom, Andrea Gaynor from UWA, now lives in Denmark. Isn't that useful? And there's lots of oral histories of the people involved who've been done it, and Alexandra from Bern has been pumping out papers lately. I better do it quick, hadn't I? I have learned since I sat in that room in Missouri last year, I've learned so much about the connection between the environment and our health and how our gut things work. And it's phenomenal and very amazing stuff. It is how we connect environmental work with communities. Dennis Wellington reckons so, and if you get Dennis's attention on the environmental stuff, you're onto something. And there's the sort of budgets. There's a biodiversity crisis, there's a climate change crisis, and there's actually a public health crisis that was happening before COVID. And we'll have some sites. Going to get the Bush campus up at Now and Up. Bloody working with. Curtin's a great place. God, they're slow. But anyway, we've got the agreement, we've got the Vice-Chancellor on board and so on. Last few slides, promise you. We now have at the start of the year, a significant program got underway between us and our main equivalent in Australia, Great Eastern Ranges Initiative. It is about knowledge exchange. It was about sending a bunch of people from here over there and bringing a bunch of them here, and that was pre-COVID. But, we are now maturing to the point where we've got to talk big time about how this all happens, what the important knowledge is. And just as we were getting that off the ground, I got a better offer. I mean, if join the movement, Restore Australia, how can you ignore that for a heading? So look it up, Restore Australia, Global Evergreening Alliance, that same mob we met in Africa a couple of years ago. They have announced the largest ever private funding for conservation in Australia, 150 million euros, 270 million Australian dollars at the moment. And we're part of 6 consortiums around Australia. Interestingly, we've got 2 of those consortiums operating over the southwest. Here we go. And we've picked the regenerative, I don't like the phrase either, wall. Last thing, I wanted to honour this. This moved me to tears when I was part of it. This town produced 1,200 people in the streets for climate change, organised by the next generation. And that was something to build on. So when we look back at our history in 2026, maybe we can think about the future. Thank you.